You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Welcome to Who Runs This Park, Park Enthusiast segment, where we expand our universe and knowledge of experiences in the outdoors and at national parks through conversations with highly regarded and respected individuals in the outdoor world. As always, Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, exploration, and appreciation of our world's natural beauty. Today we have Marie Frias Sauter with us, White Sands National Park Superintendent. White Sands National Park, located in southern New Mexico, is home to the world's largest gypsum dune field, and these gypsum crystals are what give the dunes their brilliant white color. Marie herself has been superintendent since 2012 and previously had worked across the Park Service in a variety of positions. Her passion for cartography led her to pursue her education in geography at the University of Georgia after growing up in Mexico City. I'm excited to dive into her 12 years of experience as White Sands National Park Superintendent and glean more insight into another one of our country's gems. Marie, it's an honor to be chatting with you today. Welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm glad we could get this together. So it's exciting.
I know.
Thank you.
Look at us. We did it.
Yeah, here we are.
Can you share, you've had a good amount of time thus far at White Sands. Can you share one of your crazier situations you have dealt with as superintendent?
Oh, my goodness gracious. So I've had lots of crazy situations and then some really amazing, crazy good situations. But here at White Sands National Park, we work very closely with the Department of Defense with two military installations next door to us, including Holloman Air Force Base and then White Sands Missile Range. So the work that they do and the work that we do is our missions are so vastly different. So working with them on a day-to-day basis and helping them do some of the testing that they do and supporting the work that they do, I think is pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, I think one of the most recent craziest and frankly a little frightening things that happened was that a jet fighter jet crashed in the park earlier this year. So thankfully,
wow.
The pilot was able to eject. He had minor injuries and there were no injuries otherwise. So that's pretty crazy. And my heart just goes out to the two pilots and the families who were recently lost in the F-35 Navy jet crash outside of Mount Rainier National Park. So I totally feel for the situation and the families there. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy stuff. And, we're here to support each other and help each other accomplish our missions. So
yeah. Did you say outside of Mount Rainier?
Yeah, it was in the news outside of Mount Rainier.
Wow.
It was this past week. So, yep.
Yeah, that's really intense. Can you share a little bit? We jumped just so that people kind of know a little bit more about White Sands before we jump into some of your just experience growing up and what led you to where you are. But I want people to kind of understand the lay of the land of White Sands. So can you share a little bit more about how this national park preserves the world's largest gypsum dune field?
Absolutely. The world's largest gypsum sand dune field is the park itself is close to 150,000 acres, which is the largest park in New Mexico. And the gypsum sand is, like you said, it's crystalline white. It's like snow. It's like white frosting on a cake. It's gorgeous at sunrise. It's gorgeous at sunset. And it's just can be blinding in the middle of the day. And that's what the visitors get to see, appreciate, and enjoy, but mostly on their visit. We're still in the Chihuahuan Desert. which is a very large desert that goes into, covers parts of North America down into Mexico and up, of course, into the United States. And we have a sister park down in Mexico as well. It's Cuatro Ciénegas. And we do work with them to help them support their mission too. They have a much smaller gypsum dune field too. So
Mm.
the part White Sands itself is actually quite a bit larger than the gypsum dune field, but part of the area that the park protects is called the alkali flat area, and that's where the tiny crystals are born. The mineral percolates up with the rain and then forms little tiny crystals. Well, they're not so little. They're as big as the tip of your finger, and then they tumble along with the very strong winds that we have, and that's what forms the dune field. As they tumble, the sand starts to break off, and it breaks apart. It's very soft mineral, and that's what forms the dunes. So, kind of fun fact is at the eastern edge of Alkali Flat and the western edge of the dune field, the sand is a little more yellow and say tan colored because the crystals are bigger. Looks more like mica, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And as the dunes, if you move over the dunes to the east, as the sand moves along and breaks up and becomes smaller and finer, at the end being dust, it becomes smaller, finer, and whiter. So the
Oh,
whitest
interesting.
dunes, yeah. So fun fact, yeah. So it's an amazing place. We have all kinds of animals, insects. Again, I mentioned the the viewscapes, stunning photography opportunities, night skies, good stuff.
That's what
Anyway,
I
there it
know,
is. Yeah.
White Sands as is because I grew up in Austin, and so a lot of
Okay.
people would go on road trips to White Sands National
Mhm.
Park. It's still really far away because Texas is
Yeah.
so big, but the photography that you can get at this park is just unreal. So I encourage
Yeah.
listeners, if you've never seen pictures of White Sands, you've got to look it up. And yeah, I hope
Cool.
to go one day for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned this that you have I think a sister park in Mexico. Is that what you called it? A sister park?
Yes. Yes. Well, it's an international sister park. There's a number of parks around the world that national park and other national park units within the National Park Service have, and they come together and they're sister parks and they work together on similar projects or goals and initiatives, and perhaps have similar missions. So,
Yeah. I'd love to dig into that a little bit
mm,
and understand a bit more about what it means for White Sands to be in the borderland region and how that affects management and how you interact with surrounding communities.
absolutely. It's for me personally, being in the border region has been amazing. Yeah, the borderlands, it has its own culture, if you will, that's old, old, old. Of course, the indigenous people have been here for millennia, and that's part of our story too. The trackways, the Pleistocene megafauna, and the human footprints that we're finding here. It's just millennia worth of people. And then much more recently, when the Spanish explorers came into Mexico, what they then called New Spain, and this area was New Spain as well. So the history is quite complicated, quite layered. And one of the things I learned about New Mexico when I moved out here 17 years ago as a superintendent, I said the history is alive and well here. And I would say for sure it's alive and well in the borderlands area. And there's easily many people around here, many communities around here, many families, many people. They have for generations spoken at least two languages. And if anyone is
Wow.
indigenous and they're maintaining their own cultural identity and able to have the language that their people have spoken traditionally, they may speak a third language too. So it's definitely a bilingual community all the way down through far west Texas into El Paso. People come and go across the border as they go to school. There's kids who live in Juarez and come up to El Paso to go to school. There's folks that work maybe down in Juarez and come back to live in El Paso or even Las Cruces. So there's just a lot of integration between families and culture in this borderlands region that
Yeah.
it really warms my heart, having been born in Mexico as a Mexican myself. I'm also an American. So it's really lovely to be so close to the country of my birth and where some of my family still lives. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How do you find that affects management of the park, if at all,
it
any
does.
differently?
Yeah, it does. I think one of the great things for us is that we do have high international visitation from all over the world, without a doubt. And it's more episodic. Folks come during the summer, come during Christmas, but we also have visitors that come up locally, say from Juarez and a little bit further down Chihuahua. Then they come up and they bring their families to vacation. So we definitely maintain a little bit of an international flavor year round. We also have many of our media and interpretive materials bilingual, so that
Hmm.
folks, if they come up and there are completely Spanish speakers in the area, they are able to access the same messaging, the same interpretive opportunities that we provide in English. We also provide some limited amount of information in other, I think, 7 other languages as well. So
Wow.
yeah. So I think just to me, it reminds us to be mindful of the diversity of people throughout this world and also the diversity of our area. So to me, it's a good reminder to us in the management team and also to us as a park. And we have certainly lots of folks who are native to the area.
Hmm.
They're local to the area. Their families have been here, I'll just say it, for millennia. So very, very long time. And they contribute to the park and our local culture, if you will, on an everyday basis. So,
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to jump back into just your experience growing up and kind of how it shaped
yeah,
your path to work in the Park
yeah.
Service. You mentioned that you're born in Mexico. I'd love to hear a bit more about your experience growing up, I believe, in Mexico City. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I did. I didn't spend much time there, so my memories are brief. And we came up to the United States when I was 4.5. My mom's an American, so But I will say I definitely have distinctive memories from Mexico, and that were clearly divided by the new experience being up in the United States, spending time in Georgia. So my experience as a young child in Mexico City, I will say Mexico City for me was not a thing. It was more about being a child and having those amazing, interesting experiences that will never leave me. For
Hmm.
example, going to the market with my mother and coming into the flower market part of the areas, maybe an open air or maybe a big high ceiling, open though market, and just coming into the flower stall was, I still remember it like it was yesterday. And there's little tiny wee flowers that I've seen here in the store, in any store that sells flowers. And it just throws me back every time to my
Wow.
experience with my mother in this market in Mexico City. I also have family that is from outside of Mexico City, and they had property there and ran La Posada. And Posada is a hotel, basically. It's a word for hotel in Spanish. And we spent a little bit of time there and have very formative memories of La Posada, the architecture, the people, the cobblestone streets, the donkey that was walking along the street. Right, I do remember that. I do remember that. And I've had experiences, deja vu moments here in New Mexico where, and I told my husband, I said, I've been here before. I've been here before. And I haven't been there before. It was this little tiny village somewhere in northern New Mexico. This has happened several times. And I said, this reminds me of the experiences. I feel like I've been here. These are the experiences that I had when I was a child.
Wow.
So and that really, going back to that whole concept of borderlands, that really pulls together the region for me, how much the history just is the history of this continent and is the history of the people who've been here for hundreds and thousands of years, and that I could have a deja vu experience in northern New Mexico that reminds me of a little town in just outside of Mexico City. I mean, it's kind of breathtaking when you think about it.
Yeah, that's
So,
amazing. That's cool. Yeah, we'll dig into in a little bit kind of you had mentioned how they're studying different tracks that humans took and kind of
yeah,
connecting um,
yeah.
and understanding that. So we'll dig into that
Mhm.
in a bit and I'm excited. I'm
Okay,
really excited to hear about that.
okay.
But understanding, so you moved to Georgia and then
Hmm.
you studied geography at UGA. One,
I
I will
did.
say for everyone listening, it's the week after the Texas Georgia game and I went to
Oh,
Texas.
who won?
Georgia did.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
So it was a tough I was at the game, it was tough,
Yeah. Oh my
but
God.
we survived. And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what led you to study geography and
Yeah.
then eventually get into cartography.
Thank you for asking that. So it wasn't my first plan when I went to school,
Yeah.
but that's fine. You know, plans change, and it was good because I found geography. I found my first class was weather and climate, and
Oh, wow.
weather. Everyone, we all have climate, and we all have weather, because we live on this planet. And
Yeah.
it was a very practical course, and I could literally step outside and see what was going on. It's like, oh yeah, okay, there's some climate, there's some weather. And then I
Yeah.
took a geomorphology, right? So then I took a geomorphology class, which is about landforms and the geography and the shape of the land and how and why it's shaped the way it is. And I thought, oh my God, this is so fascinating. Yes, yes, yes. So of course, making A's didn't hurt. So I kept taking classes, and I took a couple of cartography classes, and I thought, this is what it's about. And just in thinking of that sort of my connections back with having by that time spent some of my life in 2 different countries, enough in the first country to be formative and to be informative in my decision making and how I'm appreciating my experience on this planet.
Hmm.
Studying geography was like the perfect angle to learn more about how we work. Geography is very much an umbrella type of a
Hmm.
program in school. You can study cartography, which is map making. You can study geopolitical geography, which is about the politics and the geography of politics.
Oh,
Oh, wow,
wow.
that's fascinating. Transportation. You can study transportation and geography and how that relates. If you want to dig deeper in there, oh, go for it. And then, of course, health. And this health and geography is not something that was available. However, I've worked with an intern since I've been in the National Park Service who was using geography to study health and how different diseases were being mapped out in different areas and outbreaks. And then looking at different layers of, say, politics and economics to really evaluate and study why are these people experiencing outbreaks of certain kinds of illnesses and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And there's more. There's so much more.
Yeah.
Of course, there's the weather, the climate, the geology. There's the physical side of geography as well, which I loved that too. Remote sensing, and then the map making. So I was in school when when computer cartography was the thing, and we used punch cards, and we would do the programming with a typewriter, punching in holes in cards that would go into a shoebox. And God help you if you should drop your shoebox and get your punch cards out of shape, out of order. But
Oh my
we
gosh.
would take the punch card box to the computer building and give it to the operator who fed the cards into a Fortran mainframe, and the mainframe would spit out a map the next day, and it was basically a stick map. So I have had the experience throughout my life, and certainly in my education, but also into my work within the National Park Service, of watching the evolution almost from the get-go of computerized cartography, which has since turned into geographic information systems. So that's been really interesting. When I was in school, GIS as a thing did not exist. So I learned about geographic information systems at school, at work, a lot of OJT for sure, to include global positioning systems, which is a GPS, which everyone has in their cell phone, which didn't exist back
Yeah.
then, I might say. So
You mentioned a stick map. What is that?
very, very much not graceful and curvy. It was very much angular, just kind of like little tiny, what do they call it, pixels and things like that. So it was very, very basic, very rudimentary.
And what type of, I guess, why were you making maps? Was it
For
like a
studying.
school project?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the class that I took was a computerized cartography class, and then
Oh,
I
cool.
also took photogrammetry and making maps through photogrammetry, which involved going and working in a black room, and which is
Oh,
where you
whoa.
go and you take your map work that you've done, and that you basically create a negative, and then you're making me go back really far back into school. But
I know. I'm
it's
impressed with the
basically
details that you remember from
oh,
this.
yeah, it's, so yeah, so you basically create a map, but you create the negative, and then you imprint it on the photographic film for the positive. So I still
Oh,
have
cool.
all of that. I kept all of it. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's really cool. And then, so my understanding is then did you work with GIS and
I
GPS after
did.
school?
I did. Yeah. Yes, I did. And I first started that kind of work of course, within the National Park Service, and started doing GIS, if you will, at Prince William Forest Park. And that's outside of Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. And that was back in the day. It was pretty labor intensive. And I was able to use ArcMap and I'm sorry, the Esri products, as well as a couple of other products. But the global positioning systems, oh my gosh, was really complicated. And
Hmm.
getting data at that time was much, much, much more challenging. And I was running, I shouldn't get into that, but I will say that we were running equipment that we were basing our data collection on the availability of satellites at the time, because the coverage was much more limited. The satellites were still being launched and put into space. So that's how old I am.
You're like, not to age me, but there you go,
Not to
everybody.
but I remember when they were still still launching the satellites, and we would all go jump for joy. There's another satellite in the sky, which means we're going to get better coverage. We have it really easy these days. Really
Yeah, well,
easy.
I think about that even with like hiking and
Mhm.
using a map and like just the GPS on your phone versus actually
Well,
having to know how to
an,
look at topography and figure
an
out where you're
honest
going.
to God paper map.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't think I would know. I don't know how to use a compass. So,
Oh, it's, it, it's fun. I mean, orienteering is a fun thing to do. It's a good skill.
yeah, honestly, I should learn it, but and then I can
Yeah.
practice it in the national parks.
There you go.
So then, you eventually worked for the Park Service and you've worked at several places across the Park Service before working at White Sands. So can you talk a little bit before we dig into more about White Sands, can you talk a little
Sure.
bit about some experiences just across the Park Service that stand out to you?
Yeah. So one thing that folks like to ask is, which is your favorite park?
Oh, of
Um,
course.
if you're not going to ask
That's a
it.
common
I
curiosity for
know, I
people.
know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I really believe that every park is special.
Yeah.
And I have been able to find something or many things fabulous about each and every park that I have had the opportunity to work in. I have just really amazing memories of each and every one of them. As a volunteer in the Smokies, I wore out boots hiking in the Smokies, and I just have some lovely memories there. And one of the things that I was privileged, because I was able to work so long ago in the late '80s and the early '90s in some of the really big parks, is the visitation was a lot lower during much of the year, and it's just something that I really cherish, having those opportunities to be in this special places when there was a little bit less visitation. And then, of course, I would make my way out into the back of a park somewhere to just enjoy that, if you will, wilderness experience. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things I learned when I worked on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park, which is in Maryland, it starts in Washington D.C. Yay! For those of you that are listening in Washington D.C., you probably know where the C&O Canal is, and it goes 185 miles up the nation's river, which is the Potomac River. And that's when I
Mm,
really began to understand the integration of, because I was all about, give me the national park with the natural resources, with the forest, the wilderness, the vistas, all of that. Working at the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal was an aha moment for me, and it was one of those sea change moments, because I really began to understand that there's a cultural aspect to every park. I don't care how big and natural it is. There's a people aspect to each and every one,
mm-hmm.
and that's where I really began to understand the integration as inside the National Park Service, we talk about the cultural and natural resources and how each of them interplay on each other, and you can't disconnect the two, as much as some people might try. And you just have to manage everything, and people, and manage people and the access together. And so that was very eye-opening, and it was really helpful to me, I think. And that was probably 25 years ago that I had that aha moment, and it allowed me to really appreciate parks that are really focused on storytelling and history, say, as opposed to the big natural vistas. And the frankly, the majority of our parks are historical parks. The
Yeah.
lesser number of our parks are the big natural woods and forests and vistas and big deserts and things like that, although they have their cultural component as well and their people story. So those are some really, I don't know, some fun things for me. Just
Yeah.
uh,
The
yeah.
You actually kind of hinted at this just in your
Mm,
passion for some of the historical parks, and
mhm,
you've actually been on, my understanding is quite a few panels and committees. I'll
yeah.
list them
Mhm,
off because something I have
ah,
learned about in this journey
mhm,
of learning more about the park surface is there's always
mhm,
more committees and groups and awards than I
mm,
maybe originally thought. But you've been a part of the Park Services Civil War sesquicentennial National Steering
close, yes.
Community
Yeah.
Partnership Council Committee and Vanishing Treasures Leadership Committee. So can you share a little bit about, you
Yeah.
don't have to talk about all of them in great detail,
Mhm.
but yeah, like what it means to be a part of these?
Yeah, to be on, you listed out a couple there that have been particularly meaningful to me. I'll start with the Vanishing Treasures program. It had been an initiative, a 10-year funded initiative within the National Park Service to really look at and address the cultural resources, to lack of a better word, that are vanishing. Basically, they're in a state of falling apart, ruin. They're not buildings that you or structures that you can walk in and use. So
Mm-hmm.
they're leaving us in some way, shape, or form. It could be adobe structures, it could be wooden structures, they could be stone structures. They don't have to be buildings, it could be walls or fortifications or whatever, but they're not basically standing structures. And part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that initiative was that these kinds of structures were literally, I won't say neglected, but they definitely needed some kind of special care and attention. And they
Mm-hmm.
also take some very specialized expertise to help manage and ensure that these kinds of structures don't continue to fail. So, working on the Vanishing Treasures steering committee or board of directors, I've forgotten exactly what it was called. We were able to transform the initiative into a program, and this, which had been basically an initiative pretty much in the Southwest for buildings that were, a lot of them made of adobe, which
Mm-hmm.
does vanish. If you put enough water and wind on it, it does
Yeah.
vanish. So working with this committee to transition into a program which had longevity to it, whereas initiative had a finite date. So
Mm-hmm.
working with this committee and really institutionalizing the program and the directions and the goals and bringing it to the national level and having it become a national program that was recognized nationally and available, not only recognized, but also available to parks that have structures and features that are categorized as vanishing treasures, if you will. That was pretty amazing to me. Very transformative, I think, for the agency. The other committee that you mentioned was the Civil War Sesquicentennial Steering Committee, which also was transformative. And that was I became part of that to represent the region that I'm in out here in the mountainous region, and working with some amazing National Park Service historians throughout the country, pull together the themes and the meanings, and then also uncovering the untold stories of the National Park Service with regards to the Civil War. So
Mm-hmm.
slavery was obviously one story that had been very undertold and
Mm-hmm.
needed to be really focused on, and let the people for whom slavery really affected and impacted be a part of that conversation in our
Mm-hmm.
national parks. For example, the role of women during the Civil War also was more of an untold story as well. So there were a
Mm-hmm.
number of untold stories, and becoming a part of that was pretty amazing because the National Park Service was at the point of commemorating the Civil War sesquicentennial, which is the 150th anniversary of. It's about a 3-year span of the Civil War. And that effort to be the sesquicentennial led to other efforts with regards to equality and diversity, including Arc to Equality, which was also another great opportunity. And then I did not participate, but it was in this committee, but it was the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And that, I get chills just thinking about the importance of the Civil Rights Act, which the National Park Service protects some of the iconic places that tell some of the stories of the civil rights,
Mm-hmm.
and continues to have those places added to the National Park Service. So we definitely, as an agency, have some of the most amazing stories that this country has. I say the good, bad, and the ugly. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been
Yeah.
a privilege.
I mean, you saying that steering committee specifically was focused on telling the untold stories of the Park
Mhm,
Service from the perspective of the Civil War and civil rights.
mhm,
Granted, my podcast is aimed at more of the capital N, capital P national parks, as you say. For now,
yeah,
we're building audience and interest, and then we'll see what happens next.
yeah.
But the whole hope is to highlight the untold stories, and so it's cool to see that work being done across the Park Service.
And Maddie, I would add to that generally at the superintendent level, we have generally a career behind us, and we're bringing that experience with us to the
Yeah.
point we are now. And I've had again, the privilege to work at a variety of different kinds of parks, certainly not every kind, if you will, but I bring those experiences with me to help inform my day-to-day management activities and directions here at White Sands. So,
Yeah,
yep.
that's one of my favorite things is understanding the path of each superintendent and the
Ah,
exposure that they've
yep.
gotten to just different parts of the country. Like a lot of
Hmm.
people move around a decent amount and you're
Hmm.
like getting placed in these different and unique communities and
Yeah.
what a privilege that is. I'm sure there's hard
Hmm.
aspects of it, but yeah, I love highlighting that and thank you for calling that out.
Cool. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Transitioning back to White Sands a little bit, can you share more about some of the historic discoveries that have been made at White Sands that we've alluded to?
Sure. Okay, where to start? I feel like I'm not the person that's gonna give the story the most. I don't know. It's yeah, there are other people who tell the story just their eyes light up, there's stars in their eyes, who talk about the trackways. So we have Pleistocene trackways in the park. That's the megafauna, the large, very large mammals that existed. If anyone has seen the movie, is it Ice Age? No.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, with the woolly mammoth?
yeah, that's the time period. So imagine woolly mammoth walking around White Sands area in the
Crazy.
Tularosa Basin. Those are the people. Those are the animals. Giant ground sloths, camels, dire wolves. Those are really big wolves.
Camels?
Camels, they were camelid. Well, camelid, they were smaller than your modern camels now. So all of the animals are different. The sloths, if you think of sloths, they're not huge. I mean, I wouldn't have one as a pet. However, the giant ground sloths are humongous. They're gigantic. A ton. They're huge. So the footprints you can imagine that have been discovered are huge. They're
Yeah.
gigantic because they had gigantic feet in them of these animals that lived during the Pleistocene period. And my staff and others and researchers have been walking, particularly the Alkali Flats, which is an area that's close to the public because of the relationship we have with the military, have been walking, done miles and done evaluating and documenting and GPSing and mapping the different trackways, and then at some point discovered and identified, and then with some research conferred that yes, we indeed have people footprints out here too. So that the research that has been going on with that over the last, I don't know, well, no, probably 6 or 7 years has been
Mhm.
pretty fabulous. It has been groundbreaking and has been upsetting and turning things upside down with regards to the understanding of human occupation in North America. I
Mhm.
don't want to speak a whole lot to that because I'm not by no means expert in any of the above. I'm the superintendent. I'm the one that makes sure everybody's doing everything legally, frankly, and processes of the permits and the applications and reviews
Yeah.
proposals and things like that. And at times helps to find money and negotiates partnerships and relationships with all the right people. But the experts are out there, but it is definitely rocking some people's world. And I'm okay with rocking worlds just a little bit. And
Yeah.
one of the wonderful things for me personally is that for the people who've been here from the millennia, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I'm going to just say this, they already knew this. They've been here for a very long time. They've
Yeah.
known this.
Yeah.
And the people that didn't know were the people from the European descent. And
Yeah.
the discoveries are really for the research community, for the Pueblos and tribes and the indigenous Native people here. They're just like, yeah, 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 yeah. We knew
Yeah,
that.
you're like, yeah, obviously.
Obviously. And it's been really great and fun to invite our tribal partners who wish to come and participate in the research and wish to come and see the footprints, all, whatever we can take folks to safely. They're very interested folks in that community who wish to come see and document and witness, if you will, witness what's going on. So,
Mhm.
that just also gives me chills to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did it originally, because I think, and we don't have to dive into this too much, but
Mhm.
was there originally some controversy with these discoveries?
Oh,
Um,
there's still controversy. Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
How do you manage that as superintendent? Is that something you
Oh,
deal with on a day-to-day, or is it not
what a
necessarily in your purview?
wonderful question. What do I do? So the science will speak for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like this is a silly example, but I'm thinking of it because 'cause I've been playing a lot of tennis lately, and, sometimes if you're like, "I can't tell if it was out," and, like, they'll be like, "I think it was out," and you're like, "I don't think it was out," and then we'll just replay the point, and
Yeah.
my, like, joke is always, like, "The ball never lies," and so, like, if you win that point, it means it was in,
Right.
if you lose that point, it means it was out, and that's just
Ah.
kind of and so it's kind of like the
Hmm.
science tells the truth.
The science will speak for itself.
Yeah,
And that's, I mean, that's the answer to your question. The end.
yeah. I mean, not to get too into the weeds and then we'll jump on, but I feel like that's similar with climate change of like the science is speaking for
Mm,
itself at this point of we're experiencing the changes a lot
right.
and those
Right.
changes are speaking for themselves.
They are. They are. And as managers of national parks, and I'll speak for I will speak for myself here. We're looking at, a couple of different planning scenarios. One being warm, wet, and the other one being, well, basically hot, dry. I feel like right now we're experiencing the hot, dry, and how do we manage the park for either one? It's going to be interesting moving forward as we move forward in planning and visitor use management, and if there's any additional infrastructure that we need to improve or construct. Which scenario we're going to be planning for, um, and be prepared for, frankly. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of along a similar vein, what are some of this might be one of the bigger challenges, but what do you find
Mhm.
some of the biggest challenges that white sand specifically faces?
Yeah. Well, I think climate change is going to be an issue, frankly,
Yeah.
especially if we go into a very hot, dry climate scenario, which is kind of where we're headed. If you look at the trends, we're definitely climbing up in temperatures, and the rainfall is dropping a little bit. I mean, that's a very recent trend. It's not like decades of data. Well, actually, it is decades. It's probably 100 years worth of data, and you can see the trends there. And I think one of the most really concerning situations is that the dune system, the dune field, we didn't really talk about the dunes themselves so much, but this is, be it a desert, Chihuahuan Desert, it's still a wet dune system. The
Mhm.
dunes are sopping wet. You can dig a hole when you drive
Really?
out, and well, don't dig a hole because we don't want anyone to hurt themselves. But we take an auger just to do a demonstration. You could take an auger out, maybe putting a drilling post in or something, put an auger in the ground, and within probably 2 feet at the deepest 2 feet, you're going to hit the water table. The water table is right there. And I mean the kind of water where you can take a cup and dip it in and pull
Wow.
up a cup of water. Now, I would not drink it because it's extremely salty and it
Yeah.
will make you ill quickly. But the water's there, and it
Yeah.
is it is moving water. People who have camped in the dunes have heard water as they're sleeping in their, and we've had reports of people say, "I thought I heard water running."
Wow.
And it's the water that's actually moving underground. So there's little water capillaries underneath the ground, very close to the surface, as I had just mentioned. And at one point, we built a new vault toilet, which meant digging a hole in the ground so we could put the liner in.
Mhm.
And my facility manager said, "Marie, you got to see this." And so I went out to see this, and it was a big square, like 8 by 8, because that's the size of the liner, and that's the vault
Oh, wow.
building's going to sit on top of it. And honestly, the water had filled right in, and there was this much water. It was deep with water, and I'm talking about it's the kind of like little splash pool that you would put your kiddies in. It was that perfect, and the water was some shade of this. It was stunning.
So like
It was
a
beautiful.
turquoise almost.
It was like a turquoise. It was a little bit lighter than this, but just really lovely. So the water's here. So my point back to climate change is if the rain patterns stop, if the climate overall becomes quite different, if it becomes very dry and the dunes themselves start to dry up and they don't have that regenerative rainfall, that restorative rainfall, it's hugely problematic because the topsoil or the top layer of the dunes will become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the top will be subject to the big winds that we have here and will blow away. So there's a potential of dune loss over
Oh,
time,
wow.
for sure, and puts a tremendous amount of gypsum into the sky. So, yeah, I mean, that's I think one of our bigger challenges. Is it a
Yeah.
challenge that we can control? I don't think so. This is a global thing, but that I think is definitely one of the challenges. I think one of the other challenges that kind of totally switch gears that we're facing, and I think doing a pretty good job, is transitioning from national monument to national park. Not every park
Hmm.
unit gets to do that, and that's been frustrating, challenging. We wish we could have done a whole lot more, a whole lot sooner. But I think, even today, we're putting up a new road sign, highway sign that says White Sands National Park, and I know I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
But it's taken money and time and contracting, all of which we didn't have before. So I feel like we're almost late, but maybe not. So just the transitioning from national monument to national park status has been really interesting, and navigating the nuances, and also learning about the expectations not only of the visitors, because they have changed, frankly, and also understanding the expectations that this agency has for
Hmm.
the new national park too. At one point, 5 years ago, we were the newest national park. Imagine that.
Yeah. I guess what has been the biggest difference in terms of, as the superintendent managing this
Mhm.
place, um, transitioning between national monument and
Yeah.
national park?
I think yeah, there's probably two or three things. One is our visitation definitely went up, and we became a national park, I think, 3 months before the pandemic really kind of started having us to shut things down.
Yeah.
So people were just getting ramped up. Oh, a new national park. So our visitation just started to go right up. And then the pandemic happened, and I made the decision to close the park. And I kept it closed for about 3 months. And so our visitation went flat. And it took a while to pick back up. So understanding what our visitation was going to be like as a new national park, that's been challenging for us, and also
Hmm.
managing the visitors, and I'll say also their expectations. I had mentioned that, um, and so that's been a little frustrating to understand what those expectations are and how we can rise to them and meet them. And frankly, sometimes it just takes money to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's been one thing, but also understanding as I mentioned, the expectations of the National Park Service, and learning what the nuances and differences are, because we're now a capital N, capital P. We might have more data calls for,
Yeah.
for white sands. I'm like, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. You're like, oh,
So,
interesting.
oh, interesting. That's right. So we just do what we need to do.
How did things become like, was it something you were pushing for it to become a national park, or
Uh,
was that decision made by the Department of the Interior or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Maddie, for asking that. The national park, capital P, let's just say, because all of our national parks are little N's, little P's. They're all
Yeah.
units of the National Park Service system. So that idea has been around for about 100 years. However, the park, when it was established back in 1933, was established as a national monument under presidential proclamation. So the national
Hmm.
capital N, capital P did not take off the ground. There was a lot of local community support for that, and maybe some elected official support. I simply don't know that history, but the idea has never gone away. And then probably the emphasis grew a little bit more in probably the late 1990s, I'll just say the 2000s. And it certainly grew with elected officials and politicians' interest in it, and that really was the leading edge of becoming a national park, because we do not get involved in the political, I won't say agendas, but the efforts of the politicians, and we do not promote, yes, this politicians or this I'll say this elected officials, their goal, we can't support it because we're neutral, we're the federal government. So
Hmm.
we had no position during the whole effort to bring the national park concept to Congress, into legislation. We stayed neutral in the whole thing. And so we did not have an opinion. Yay, we support it. Nay, we don't support it.
Hmm.
That was something that we would not do, and we would not have done. So, and we did not do. So yeah.
That's interesting. To give listeners, we talked about this at the beginning, but to give them more of a sense of the type of experiences one can have in White Sands, can you share your favorite experience you've personally had as
Ah,
a quote unquote visitor? Not that you were a visitor, but just experiencing the park.
so I've had lots of experiences. I did go to one full moon night event at a concert we had some years ago with friends. That's great. That's so much fun. It was just really,
That's
it was beautiful. It was lovely. It
yeah,
was
the
as
full
simple
moon
as
on the
that.
sands must be
Falling on the
amazing.
Sands was lovely. The music was lovely. My friends were lovely. It was all lovely. I remember the first time my husband and I and one of my friends who've known forever, she brought her two adult friends with her, adult sons with her. And so the five of us, we went out into the dunes. We hiked off by Flat Trail. That was good. It was hard, but I just remember sledding down the hill with her, and we are just giggling and laughing and just being as silly as ever. And then we made snow angels in the sand, which was cool. It was fun.
Yeah, that's the I haven't been, like I mentioned, I have not been to White Sands, but I've been to Great Sand Dunes. So
Yeah.
similar of a sand dune. And
Yep.
we rented the like sleds and
Yeah.
I rented the like snowboard. Uh
Oh boy.
or yeah, it was fun, but it's you
Uh-huh.
honestly don't go that fast, which is I guess
Okay.
good. Um
Yeah.
but yeah, it was really fun, but it's really hard work climbing up
Yeah.
the sand dune. You're like, "Oh, let me just hike back up." And then by the end you are gassed.
It's hiking the dunes and the dunes trails. It is hard work. Just because it's Alkali Flat Trail, one should not assume that it is a flat trail. It is not. It's up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down on
Yeah, it's
sand.
like walking
Let me
on the
add.
beach or running
Mhm.
on the beach where you're like, "Yeah, that was really hard." Are there backcountry trails or, like, camping opportunities within White Sands?
Yeah, we do have had primitive camping, and we've put it offline until we get some safety issues resolved, which we're working on to make it as safe as an experience for park staff, and certainly for the visitors. So we've been working on that. And the pandemic, everything was kind of offline anyway. But hiking, yeah, absolutely. We have hiking, a couple of hiking loops. We have an accessible trail, which we are working on some updates to that. And then we have also, as I mentioned, the Alkali Flat Trail, which is about between a 4 and a 5 mile trail back to the Alkali Flats, so you can see where the crystals are formed, the little weed
Oh, cool.
crystals. Yep, that is a trail that I would never ever ever recommend anyone do in the hot months of the year. It's a deadly trail. It's just too hot and it's too much of a trail. And we warn people. We have safety messages all over the place. But then there's the backcountry camping loop, which is a nice 2 mile loop. That's definitely one of my favorite trails. And then a 1 mile loop for families. It's the Dune Life Nature Trail. It's got little Katy kit fox on the waysides, and it's great for families. If you have kids, bring them
Mhm.
out. That's the way to go. We're getting new waysides installed sometime this year to refresh them. Katy kit fox is fading away in the sun. And then we have a new trail that we're working on, the Playa Trail, which will feature as soon as it's going to take probably a year or two to get through the compliance, et cetera. But it's
Yeah.
the Playa Trail that we're turning into the Ice Age Trail, so you can experience the megafauna concept.
Whoa,
Yeah. Oh, that was my fave.
that's cool. Well, those are all great recommendations for I hope
Mhm.
people are listening to this taking notes of which trails
Cool.
to do and when to not do them,
When to not
i.e.,
do them. No,
be
no.
careful of the summer
Middle of
months.
summer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As we wrap up our time, a way
Mhm,
I like to finish off the conversations
mhm.
is understand if there was something you wish everyone knew about White Sands National Park,
Oh.
regardless of if they have or haven't been.
So I did give this some thought. And from my perspective, now having spent 12 years in the park, I think the dunes are absolutely drop dead gorgeous and they're stunning. But there's more that meets the eye
Yeah.
at at this national park. Some of the features are a lot more subtle. They're not as obvious. And we don't have great mountains in the park. However, the mountains are in ring the park and the Tularosa Basin, and they're part of the park story. We also have soils and rapid adaptation for insects and animals, which is something that you'll have to come and experience, including the endemic moths, and then of course the trackways. So a lot of subtlety here in the
And of
desert.
course, what was the last thing?
The trackways.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes, the trackways.
How do you, this is actually just a curiosity, do you like block off the areas where trackways have been discovered?
So the trackways, frankly, are in a part of the park that's already closed to the public, and it's the part of the park that has been we close it to the public because we're supporting the military over that part of the park. They are not allowed to use that part of the park, but they fly over the park. So the missile range does a lot of testing over that part of the park, and frankly, it's not safe for the public to be over there. And
Yeah.
that's where the trackways are. So it's a real interesting dichotomy, if you will. But we're looking for ways to share that story with the public because it needs to be shared, and the public needs to be able to appreciate the trackways. They're pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you, Marie, for your time.
Oh,
Thank you for sharing your story
yeah.
and a little bit more about White Sands. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thank you, Maddie, and good luck with your great work.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening today. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. If you liked this podcast, rate, review, download, and tell your friends about it. This ensures the stories of our national parks and how they are run are shared. Listen to the other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts or visit us at whorunsThisPark.com to learn more. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.